Today, I've got a very strange question for you. Have you ever been to a good funeral? Do you think it is possible to describe a funeral as good? For the sake of time, let's look at two accounts in the Bible when Jesus encountered what is now known as death. We will consider them and discover how Jesus showed compassion to the brokenhearted. The first of these accounts is found in Luke 7, beginning verse 11. It says there, "And it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now, when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, Weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And he delivered him to his mother. And there came fear on all, and they glorified God, saying, The great prophet is risen among us, and that God has visited his people." Wasn't that a good funeral? I think I like that. It didn't start out well, but it ended up in a triumphal entry back into the village of Nain. Let's try to piece together the story just a little bit. The village of Nain was about 5 miles from Nazareth, and in those days, they did not have a closed casket like we have right now. The dead person was wrapped in a linen sheet and laid it on a sort of wickerwork stretcher. If the family was poor, there would be at least 2 flute players and 1 hired mourner. If the family was more well-to-do, there would be many flute players and hired mourners. This widow was apparently loved by many people of the town, and almost the whole village was in the procession. And as they left the village, they met another procession, the crowd following Jesus. So you see those 2 companies of people meeting on the narrow pathway just outside the village of Nain. So one of the first things we notice about how Jesus treats the brokenhearted was, his words to this widow. He said, don't weep. What a strange thing for him to say. People are expected to cry at funerals. Is it wrong to cry at a funeral? No, Jesus himself cried at the tomb of Lazarus. So what is he saying? He was saying that he felt bad for her. He found his heart touched with her grief. He had compassion on her. Don't cry. He knew she wouldn't need to cry, for he knew what he was going to do. Then Jesus did something unusual. He went up and touched the funeral bier. No Jew would have considered such a thing. Those who carried the bier stood still, and the lamentations of the mourners stopped. The company of people gathered about the bier, hoping against hope. One was present who had banished disease and vanquished demons. Was death also subject to his power? In a clear, authoritative voice, the words are spoken, "Young man, arise." That voice pierces the ears of the dead. The young man opens his eyes. Jesus takes him by the hand and lifts him up. His gaze falls upon his mother, and they unite in a long, joyous embrace. You imagine the multitude looked on silence, as if spellbound, hushed and reverent. They stand for a little time as if in the very presence of God, which indeed they are. Then they begin to glorify God. How would you like to have a funeral like that? It was good, right? The second account of Jesus meeting death is found in the famous story of Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, recorded in John 11. Jesus loved to visit the home of these friends of his. Whenever he was in Bethany, he would find some time to spend with them. But when Lazarus became ill, Jesus was not in town. It was a terrible sickness. The doctor looked serious from the beginning. Things didn't look good, so Mary and Martha sent a messenger off to find Jesus. It was a huge search, but they found him. And when they found him, he told him about Lazarus' condition. He said, "This sickness is not unto death." So you can imagine the messenger returned to Bethany and said, "We've got good news. Jesus says that Lazarus' sickness is not unto death." And the sisters rushed into the room of Lazarus and said, "Lazarus, you don't need to worry. We got word from Jesus. You're not going to die." "Really?" "Yes." That's what he told the messenger. "You won't die." "Sure, feels like it." And he continued to hope, and he continued to get worse. Finally, he went into a coma, and then he died. It must have been hard for Mary and Martha to accept. What a test of their faith in Jesus. But if you look beyond today, the times of mourning lose their sting. We look forward to the time when Jesus comes to wake those who sleep. Here in the middle of the story of Lazarus, we find a famous verse. Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Friends, I could ask the same question today. Jesus said, "Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Those who do, it can have a good funerals, even though they might weep. For we often weep when we say goodbye, right? When we say goodbye to our friends who are leaving for a long journey. It's all right to weep, but we don't weep like those who have no hope. Well, Jesus went out to the cemetery with Mary and Martha, and the crowd followed them. He walked up to the door of the rock-hewn tomb, and he said, "Roll away the stone." Even Martha drew back and said, "No, you're going too far, Lord." Jesus said that Lazarus was sleeping, but by the time the stone was removed, he had been asleep for 4 days. Nobody could argue this time about whether or not he was really dead. Sure, he was dead. But they rolled away the stone and watched breathlessly while Jesus prayed a simple prayer. And then Jesus commanded, "Lazarus, come forth." Some have said that if he hadn't singled out Lazarus, the entire cemetery would come alive. Maybe that's true. But Lazarus came forth and was restored to his family and friends. What a story. Friends, as I looked through the comments below, I saw all kinds of prayer requests. And some of them were prayers of comfort and peace. And I sensed that there was grief and deep sorrow in their hearts because they had lost a loved one. But I want to remind you that we can rejoice today for the good news that we call death only sleep, and that Christ still has the power to awaken our loved ones from their sleep and to give them everlasting life. We can rejoice that he still has the power over death and the grave while he comforts us in our times of mourning. Today, he invites you and me to look forward to the day when it comes again and death is swallowed up in victory. May the Lord bless you.